So at this point in our study of the Industrial Revolution, we have had a project. We have completed a DBQ. We have learned about labor unions. And for those of you who follow along, you might be looking at this chapter going, holy cow, it is still going. It is a big, fat chapter. Kind of like me at an Italian buffet, big and fat. But I digress. So if you were absent from class, I broke down the main points from these pages because I honestly feel you have a pretty good grasp of things between the project and between the DBQ. So this is mainly, content information in case you see it come springtime when you're taking your AP exam, okay? So if you were absent, this is the crux of what we learned about. So starting with pages 404 to 406, fairly easy proposition. People from Europe went to a lot of different places. This map is a fairly easy map to read, and you can see millions and millions of Europeans took off and went to other places, including 32,300,000 to the United States, including my grandparents. So why were they moving? Okay, with industrial jobs came economic opportunity. Okay, and I think we learned that already in our projects. Okay, and then moving along, it broke down the United States, how it industrialized without socialism. So explosive growth really moved quickly. The Industrial Revolution in America, these economies of scale, boomed really, really fast. We have governments with pro-business legislation that encourages this capitalism. Mass production for a mass market, a lot of people, and we're producing a ton of stuff, and it creates this culture of consumption that we're very much still living in. Buy, buy, buy. And then we have these big hotshots, these big, you can look at modern times and look at Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos and Zuckerberg from Facebook. We have these big hotshots today. But back in the day, we had Ford, Carnegie, Rockefeller, and what it created with this idea is that, hey, in America, we can all be a big hotshot. And this notion, this cultural notion, has not gone away in modern times. However, if you were a worker, especially an unskilled worker, it was a tough gig, unsanitary conditions, crowded conditions. It was hard to make it. So it was difficult. Long hours, not a lot of protections, that kind of thing. Okay, so what happened when workers were mistreated, they had strikes. And these strikes sometimes became very violent. A strike is when workers refused to work, and sometimes governments were involved in forcing the issue, beating people's heads in. And these corporations hired thugs to beat up the strikers. So labor went through a real struggle to get their rights and reasonable working hours and conditions. To this day, we have Labor Day that we commemorate right when school starts. So we have these, then it becomes very political. And to this day it is, where unions are synonymous with more of a left wing and right wing groups do not want unions, where conservatives then and now tend to side with the corporations, with the bosses, where the more left political leaning people and modern day Democrats side with the worker. That hasn't changed since the time of the Industrial Revolution. And then we see this rise of populists and progressives, where in America we have these people, these progressives who wanted to reform things, to make things safer and cleaner and make life better. And it wasn't super radical like it was in other places in the world. Okay, so this corresponded with those pages. And then if you look at pages 410 to 412, you compare it to Russia. Now, Russia went about it very different than the United States. And I'm going to talk about the Russian Revolution at a later date. But what we see is Russia had a monarchy, the Romanovs. And the Romanovs were overthrown to a communist nation. So it was all of the resources are collectivized. So their process was a communist one, whereas America was a capitalist one. However, like America, very rapid growth, a lot of factories popped up in a very short amount of time. So we see this group, the proletariat. Now, the proletariat would be this working class, and they weren't huge, but they became more and more radical and gained control of Russia, thus having a communist nation. So what we see is, when I talked about revolution, and again, I'm going to house this for a later day to go in more detail about the Russian Revolution. So in short, Russia did industrialize, but it looked a lot different than America. Okay, now moving on to 413 to 419, we look at how industrialism played out in Latin America. And in Latin America, turbulent might be a euphemism. It was difficult for these new Latin American nations to get their footing, okay? And it gave a rise to these caudillos. And these are military leaders that came to power in these chaotic times. So what we see in Latin America is a lot of military involvement in their process, to the point of war between castes, meaning social classes. So it's a pretty contentious way to have industrialism take foot there. Now, in terms of being part of the world economy, the Latin American nations were slower to the table than the Americans and the Europeans and the Russians. So it was more of a challenge for them. However, they had a lot of things going for them, like a lot of natural resources that the world coveted, a lot of commodities that people wanted. But what we see happening is, in a sense, the Latin American nations not profiting as much as some other places in the world. Now, did it become like Europe? Well, there was the people at the highest echelons did try to emulate Europe. They wanted to be big hotshots like Europe was doing. We did see some urbanization in the big capital cities, big major cities like Buenos Aires, for instance, in Argentina. And what happened is Latin American governments encouraged Europeans to come over to make themselves more like Europe. And I think it was more of an economic decision than a cultural decision. You could make an argument it was both or what have you. And what happened is you had the rich got richer and the poor got poorer. So in this move that Latin American nations did, the people at the top did get rich, but the common person did not. Now, in terms of having a union in Latin America, harsh, really harsh. The book called it Met with Brutal Repression. Okay, you're getting your wig split with a, big stick, or you're getting shot. It was very, very violent against the workers. So anyhow, so the majority of the people did stay poor. And the Mexican Revolution I'm going to house for a later day. As you can see, it's in the final unit, the 1900 to the present unit. So I'll talk about the Mexican Revolution at a later day, like the Russian Revolution. So we do see a lot of these banana republics, and we see these foreign influences making things a little more challenging for the Latin American people, okay? So you can see the U.S. interventions, how many times the U.S. got involved, and at the same time you can see the exports that were valuable, these commodities, to the world. And we went at great length in class about this, and for the sake of these videos, I don't want to bore you to death, but please put a good focus on this map here from your book, okay? And again, with the Mexican Revolution, this picture from your book, and you can see the train right here, very prominently displayed with this industry. So again, I'm going to house this for another day. All right. So the last page of this chapter was the reflections, history and horse races, that I found the most interesting of all your reading. And it talked about the fascination with first, that historians and students of history often obsess about the first achievements for whatever odd reason. And being first is being better. It creates this assumption that if you're first, it's the best or it's better. And that's not necessarily true, but it is in the mind of historians. And the unexpectedness of the Industrial Revolution. The world historians stress the unexpected nature of British and European industrialization, and thus note that it was not preordained by an alleged European superiority. This is back to the social Darwinism. Why did Europe do so well? Well, they're the most superior, this kind of thing. Okay, not the healthiest way to view the world, obviously. And perhaps the spread is more important. So in the future, historians might not be concerned with who was the first to industrialize, but how this form of production spread around the world. Okay, so this last part was interesting, but more general historical thinking, and nothing wrong with that. So we concluded this chapter with an SAQ. SAQs are going to be on your test in the springtime. And I know we just did a DBQ. However, we have to pepper in these test-taking practices to do well come springtime. So if you were absent, please complete the SAQ on 433C and 433D. Turn it in. We'll call it a chapter. We'll move on to some other things. So that's what we did in class. And as you can see, one more time, it is straight up from the book. So if you are a good reader and you can glean information from your reading, really didn't need this video, But if this helped, I'm glad. And if it didn't, I'm sorry you've taken 10 minutes of your life. And I look forward to seeing you when you get back to class. So hope this unit or this chapter was a positive experience for you, and moving on tomorrow. So thank you for watching.